So, Robert, to get started, I was wondering if you can just give me a little bit of background about yourself. How did you end up becoming a Catholic and getting involved in writing about other Catholics and other spiritual leaders?
I was raised by my mother in the Episcopal Church. My parents were divorced, and I grew up with her. And I took that quite seriously when I was young. Uh, at a certain point, with the Vietnam War raging, my parish church felt just kind of comfortable and not very engaged in what was going on in the world. And I began to learn about people like the Berrigans and Dorothy Day. And eventually that led to my taking a leave from college, what I planned for a year in 1975 to go work with Dorothy Day at the Catholic Worker Movement in New York City. And I ended up staying there for 5 years, served for 2 years as managing editor of the Catholic Worker newspaper. And it was, I don't know if, inevitable, but it didn't really feel that way. At the beginning, when I first went there, I kind of felt very at home in the kind of milieu of this progressive, engaged, activist Catholic community, without feeling any, need to that I needed to become a Catholic. And it was really during a couple of years when I was working as a hospital orderly in a home for terminal cancer patients that was operated by an order of Dominican nuns. It was a deep experience of a kind of retreat. So I worked nights there, and I had a lot of time to read, and in this kind of atmosphere of ultimate concern as people are dying all around me. And it was during that time, the reading I was doing, kind of building on the experiences I'd had, that really made me feel attracted to Catholic Church, because it, for similar kinds of reasons as it did for Dorothy Day, when she became a Catholic, I think that Catholic Church felt like it was demanding something from you, intellectually, morally, in terms of your whole kind of orientation, and not just a matter of going to church on Sundays. And that really captivated me. And so I ended up being received into the Catholic Church in 1980. And it was right just after that I returned to finish my college degree. Dorothy Day died just within months of that. And I set about editing her selected writings. When she asked me to be editor of the Catholic Worker, I didn't really, see that she was setting me on the kind of direction of my life work and vocation, not just as a writer and editor, but as an editor of her writings. And that led, well, it's a bit of a long story, but I ended up studying theology at Harvard Divinity School. I was very influenced by Latin American liberation theology, which at that time was mostly known through translations published by Orbis Books, the publishing arm of Merton. And lo and behold, in 1987, I was invited to come to Orbis to become the new editor-in-chief. And I've been there ever since. So that's going on 34 years now. I'm the publisher as well as editor-in-chief. As far as saints, that really came about without a lot of foresight. I realized that, looking back, that I have always been attracted to or fascinated by how faith, or ideas for that matter, are lived out concretely in people's lives. I realized that almost any school paper I ever wrote in college or graduate school was always focusing on a person and trying to figure out how their ideas were shaped by their biographical, experience or their historical context. So that was always something that interested me, and it built on the reinforcement I had from Dorothy Day at the Catholic Worker. Because of her, that's very much the way she thought. She was not a big reader of theology or philosophy, but she loved to read novels, and she loved to read biographies, and she loved to read lives of the saints. And she talked about this whole kind of canon of what you could call Catholic worker saints that included, ranged from canonized saints like Saint Francis or Saint Benedict or her favorite saint, Therese of Lisieux, but it also included activists and peacemakers and people beyond the boundaries of Christianity, like Gandhi, or Jewish prophets like Abraham Heschel, or even fictional characters from Dostoevsky. And so when I was at Orbis, I had this idea of maybe finding someone who would put together a book of daily reflections on a very eclectic, canon of saints like that. And someone said, well, why don't you just do it yourself? And it was, well, kind of a light bulb went off. It was one of those fantastically significant moments when I realized, yeah, why not? Because I had, as a student or as an editor, you're kind of thinking, well, I've got nothing of my own to say. I'm not an expert on anything, but it just poured out of me. My book All Saints was published in 1997, and 600-page book, and I wrote the whole thing in a year while I was working full time, just working in the middle of the night. So it was a real kind of vocational kind of calling, and it led to things that, again, I didn't anticipate. I thought maybe that'd be my one book on saints, but you held up there the successor that I did on women saints, and I did a book called The Saint's Guide to Happiness. Then Liturgical Press was launching a new periodical called Give Us This Day, and they asked if I would write a daily contribution to that with the title Blessed Among Us. And that's been now 10 years I've been doing that, over 1,000 pieces I've written for them. And several other books on saints that I've done in the meantime. I also was invited to be the editor of Dorothy Day's personal writings, her diaries and her letters. And as you pointed out, my most recent book, then, Living Gospel. That takes us up to the present, and a very long answer to your very short question.
Well, you've become the go-to guy, I guess, to tell us about saints, to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. To glean some kind of insight, I guess, for us. I think non-Catholics would probably look at this focus on saints as sometimes a little bit strange, maybe a bit of a dated view, mm-hmm. but you've been able to contemporize, mm-hmm. to make relevant the lives of the saints and show us how we have saints around us. Mm-hmm. The fact that some of the people who we may overlook in our own lives may even be saints.
Well, I think, yeah, a lot of Protestants might think that that Catholics worship saints, or that they serve as some kind of we think some magical mediator between us and God, and to be sure, I think Catholics have historically conveyed sometimes a more sort of superstitious veneration of the saints, and the idea that saints are kind of heavenly patrons who have all kinds of powers and can do things for us, rather than looking at the saints as St. Paul did when he referred to all of the Christians as of Corinth or something as the saints. That it simply means people who are walking the path of holiness, who are attempting in their discipleship to relate the story of their lives or their way of living to the story of Jesus. And those who do that in an exceptional way are recognized by the church, but that's hardly the sum total of saints who are known to God. We're all kind of saints in progress. Some of us just only on our best days, some more consistently, so I wanted to kind of open that up considerably in my writings, and not just to begin with the canonized saints, but to begin in a way more inductively with asking what are the kind of spiritual needs of our time, and who are the kinds of people who might, reflect that, or open a window into our understanding that, more deeply. And so that included writers and poets and activists and artists, and as well as founders of religious orders, martyrs, prophets of various kind. Um, and the book on women saints is one of my favorites because there I just organized it around the Beatitudes. And I didn't really just stick, to here's the list of women saints, because that's difficult. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because even in a book like All Saints, which departs in a lot of ways from conventional kind of categories of saints, it reflected the traditional imbalance of about 3-to-1 in terms of men versus women. And I was very interested in why are there so few, women saints among the canonized saints. And that, got me thinking about the whole kind of politics of canonization, and who determines who's a saint, and also our kind of categories of holiness, and how the church has tended to box women into certain kind of narrow categories, like, virgin martyrs, or founders of religious orders, or matrons, or things like that, the kind of labels which don't really apply to male saints, and to emphasize supposedly kind of female virtues of humility and obedience and self-effacement, whereas you see in some of these stories of holy women, women who were incredible leaders and courageous, path breakers, both in terms of their apostolates they founded, or their spirituality. They showed creativity and imagination, and they were prophets who challenged the church. They broke through kind of the given categories that were available to them in their times. And that seemed to me a particularly inspiring way of thinking of what it means to be a saint today. As somebody often who doesn't just put on the kind of prefab made of a suit of clothes, but shows innovation and creativity in kind of asking what are the deep needs of our time, and how is God calling me to respond to those, even if that means really inventing a new path that no one really recognized before. And again, that took me very back to my great mentor, Dorothy Day, who in her own life kind of invented a new model of holiness. Mm-hmm. So I think that I've found a lot of non-Catholics who resonate with what I've done, and not just in the method, but in many of the people I've chosen, because I don't stick just to Catholics, and there are plenty of Protestants and even non-Christians and people who don't exactly fit into obvious categories, like Albert Camus or something like that, a famous non-believer who yet I think poses an important challenge as a dialogue partner with Christianity.
Maybe we could fast forward again back to this latest book I was referring to, A Living Gospel, how you've included some people who very likely are not going to be canonized. Mm-hmm. Okay, and why you included them, and what they sort of bring to us. Like the one that jumps out for me again and then again is Henri Nouwen, mm-hmm. for example, who himself almost prided himself on being a faulty human being. He was not honest about it. He was very honest. He was not closed about the fact that he had all kinds of struggles, not just in his writing, but also in his work with people, his talks, his teachings. He spoke from a point of weakness all the time.
Well, in this book, a little departure from some of my other books, because the point was not to focus so much on telling stories, except in an illustrative kind of way. The main point was to kind of try to get across the idea that holiness, or being a saint, is not some kind of benchmark that you achieve and then you're kind of done. Although that's sort of the way we think of saints, Saint Patrick or Saint Augustine or something like that. We think of them as kind of fully hatched. Instead of looking at what was the process or the journey that they went through. And that got me very interested in the idea that of not just looking at the great achievements, that the legacy that they may have left in terms of their writings or communities that they founded, but looking at how their holiness was expressed in the whole course of a life, in the narrative of a life, which is very much what the Gospels tell us. We see it just tells a story about Jesus. And that story is not just about all the good parts, where the crowds loved him, he changed water into wine, or the glorious mysteries. But part of that story are also all the times of his being exhausted and having to get away and feeling misunderstood even by his closest disciples. His agony in the garden, his betrayal by one of his own disciples, his abandonment. All of those are part of the story. And it made me think that the same is true for any Christian, any person, I think. If you look back at your life, you see this story that has moments of breakthrough and insight and conversion, but also times of confusion and sense of failure, that kind of searching for a vocation that you see in the lives of so many of the saints, even Dorothy Day. And so I then wrote about several people who have been important to me: Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Henri Nouwen, Flannery O'Connor. All of them interest me as much for the kind of story of their journey as they do for what their ideas were, or what their message was, or legacy. Henri Nouwen is a good example, because I think that he and Thomas Merton, in different kinds of ways, are people who were, they exemplify that what Pope Francis calls a journey faith, as opposed to what he says is a laboratory faith, in which everything is just sort of truths that all fit together, like a mathematical syllogism or something. In a journey faith, we maybe trust that God is with us, but we don't always know where we're going, and we stumble and we fall along the way, and uncertainty and doubt are part of the process. And you see, in the case of Thomas Merton, let's say, and you could say the same of many other saints. You could say, well, his story is about how he had this troubled, kind of confused life, and then he became a monk, and he found his vocation. There you go. But if you really look at his writings, you look at his life, and you see how he's constantly responding to a call to go deeper into the heart of his vocation, where God is calling him. And he goes to this great turning point that's very famous for Merton, where he has this kind of epiphany one day in downtown Louisville, realizes that there are no strangers, that he's related to all these people, that he had felt that he had kind of left the world and all the world of sin and confusion behind, and now he was safely in the monastery praying for the world, and realized, no, I'm part of the world. These people are part of me. We're all brothers, sisters, and children of God. And it changes the whole orientation of his writing after that. Now, he didn't have a very dramatic life, in terms of it was mostly just the monastery, and he went to a hermitage, and then at the end of his life, he goes to Asia, and he dies in Thailand very, very abruptly. But you see this right up until the end of his life, a kind of searching, a questing. It's funny that even the Seven Storey Mountain, his famous book, and people often think of, again, that's their idea of Merton. It ends there when he comes to the monastery. But the seven-story mountain begins with this little Latin line, people maybe not remember, but it basically says, here ends the book, but not the journey or not the search. And I think that is, I think, one of the gifts that Merton gives us. And Henri Nouwen's very much a similar kind of person, a very restless person, beset by all kinds of anxieties and uncertainty about his vocation and what he's supposed to do. He tries out all different kinds of things, teaching one place or another, going to Latin America, going to a Trappist monastery, even following around with a circus troupe for a while. And then he gets this call to be the chaplain or be part of this L'Arche community in Canada, living with handicapped adults. And it becomes his home for the last 10 years of his life. And it's not like, okay, he's arrived, all done. No, even there, he's constantly being challenged. He's constantly beset by crises and doubts and failures. But you see, toward the end of his life, I think this acknowledgement that this kind of restlessness, his anxieties, he's never going to be really done with them. They are a gift in some way. They're given to him for a purpose, and he's pursuing and responding to that call to follow God where God is calling him. Right up to the last moment of his life, when he again died suddenly of a heart attack. Strangely, a guy who had been so restless and beset with worries about his home, where his true home was, and he was actually on his way to Russia to do a film about his favorite book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, and he dies in his home country with his father and his family around him. And both Merton and Nouwen, I quote the prayers, in the book, in my chapters there, where they talk about, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know the road ahead, but kind of trusting, to God, I know you're with me, and you won't abandon me, So both of them represent that sense of the holiness that lies in the journey itself. In being faithful to the journey, in being faithful to the call to go deeper and deeper into the heart of our vocation. I don't think either of them was likely to be canonized, though Merton was one of the two Catholics that Pope Francis cited when he came to speak to a joint session of Congress, the other being Dorothy Day, along with the other two great Americans, Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King. So I like to hold up people like that who may never be canonized. They're not going to have churches named after them. That's fine. In the case of Dorothy Day, she probably will be canonized, but not Merton, not Henri Nouwen. And yet I think they are really important models and companions to many of us who are also engaged in that kind of spiritual journey.
To bring us right up to date, you told me that your dad is celebrating his 90th birthday and
next month, yes,
and 50th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, this year.
In June, it'll be the 50th anniversary of the publication of the Pentagon Papers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely, and he will turn 90 in April.
So there's another hero for a lot of people. He may not qualify quite as a saint or as a shining example for the church, but I would say he is a hero who was very courageous. Why don't you just touch on where people who are not followers in the same way as the saints that you've described, but who are nevertheless heroic, using your dad as an example?
Well, again, I organized my book on women around the Beatitudes. And when you look at the Beatitudes, which, Jesus basically laid out in the Sermon on the Mount as the kind of framework of what it means to be a person of faith, a faithful disciple. And they're not really the criteria for canonization. You don't see when someone's canonized, this person was exemplified mercy, or this person was, a peacemaker. We say, well, they were orthodox. They can attribute these miracles to them. They had a reputation for holiness, but the Beatitudes are really I think the Pope called it an identity card, for a Christian. But there are qualities there that are obviously embodied by many other people besides Christians, and that's another way in which we can recognize this kind of family resemblance among enlightened or holy people of every tradition, or people who don't even identify themselves as religious. My father, I think, would be one of those people. He was once arrested in a demonstration, and he found himself in a kind of a cohort that was identified as people of faith. And someone said, are you a person of faith?" And he said, "Well, I don't know about that. I think I'm a person of hope." Another theological virtue. My father was a government analyst and Defense Department official who went to Vietnam for 2 years and became profoundly affected by that and sense of the injustice, the wrongness of the Vietnam War. And then he participated in a top secret study of the history of the war, sponsored by the Defense Department. And when he came to the end of that, he had a much is a very radicalizing effect on him, because he believed that this was not just something that had gone wrong, but that it was essentially a crime based on lies and deception that was perpetuating unjust killing. And he thought, this is a crime that needs to be resisted. Well, how to do that? And in the meantime, he met young draft resistors, young men in particular, who didn't have access to top secret documents like him, but just using their own freedom, which they were willing to sacrifice to go to jail rather than to cooperate with the draft. And that, in discovering kind of the writings of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and realizing that there was a kind of whole science of truth-telling and nonviolent resistance, inspired him then to copy the Pentagon Papers and ultimately to make it available to the press. So he was arrested and faced many felony charges, 115 years in prison. And that was the kind of context of my growing up. He didn't go to jail because of the misdeeds of the Nixon administration, but he has spent the rest of his life since then really devoted to peacemaking, and particularly calling attention to the dangers of nuclear war, which is really his primary area of expertise and obsession. So that was one of the factors that certainly inspired me to go to the Catholic Worker, but it also is one of the things I think that has inspired my belief in the importance of telling stories of people who show courage, as you would say, moral courage, who see something that needs to be done and say, well, nobody else is going to do it, so I should do it. It turns out that there are more people like that than we think. Not so many of them that with top secret clearances, as it turns out. But I like to tell those kind of stories because they awaken people to the possibility that we might be called to do that in our own lives or in smaller ways that are available to us. There are people who have shown enormous courage in situations where it costs them their lives, and in most cases that's really not what's holding us back. It's more a matter of, well, it'd be a lot of trouble, or it'd be inconvenient, or it might get me in trouble with my boss or my neighbors, or people look at me funny. And yet, if we were raised more on stories of not just great generals and warriors from who in battle showed courage in battle, but stories of people who showed courage in civic life, such as the very ordinary people of Black people in the South who were sharecroppers or, hairdressers, bus drivers, whatever, who waged this, incredible campaign against injustice, really trying to redeem the promise of America, and facing real consequences. Those are stories that need to be told. Someone like a John Lewis, who spilled his blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and here we are, 50 years later, more than that, 75, whatever it is, still fighting the battle for voting rights. So, one of the people, for instance, who really inspires me, and I've written about him a lot, and also in my new book, is Franz Jägerstätter, the Austrian peasant Catholic, lay Catholic, who was beheaded by the Nazis for refusing to serve in Hitler's army. He wouldn't take an oath of allegiance to the Fuhrer, and so he was beheaded. And he did this without any expectation that anyone would know what he had done, much less that it would, end the war. It was a totally hidden gesture. There's a new movie about him called A Hidden Life. Big motion picture came out last year. And for many years, his name was not known at all. And it was only an American pacifist scholar who discovered his story in the 60s and wrote a book about it. Well, what it does when you see that there's somebody like Franz Jägerstätter who, without any support from his church or his neighbors or anybody in his time really, saw something that he felt needed to be done and was prepared to lay down his life for it. It's a story just taken right out of the early years of the church and the earliest martyrs who died rather than sacrificed to the emperor. And yet those are stories that we know all about, all the heroic soldiers in D-Day and all that sort of thing. But a story like that, it opens up, enlarges our idea of what courage is. And the idea also that it's not, he didn't make a calculated, choice, a decision that this might do something. This might end the war. I might be canonized one day. He had no such thoughts, although he has been beatified now. And there are, kind of innumerable opportunities that we face. I mean, martyrdom, bearing witness, is not just standing in front of a firing squad. Often it's just, it's doing something that costs us something. It's a costly kind of witness. It's not really a martyrdom or witness if it doesn't cost us anything, or it's not even a witness at all, really, if it doesn't cost us something. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our integrity? What is our soul? What is our honor? What is our sense of decency worth to us? What price are we willing to pay for that? And we don't, necessarily know that until we're, faced with a situation where that's even a real question. So, yes, I don't think my father's is not going to be canonized, but he's an example of the kind of story that I am interested in telling.
Beautiful. And the future, are you on a journey still, Robert? Do you have anything you're being called to go forward?
Well, I hope so. Hope it's not all over. What has been interesting to me is, when I look back, it all just seems very, consistent. That, well, I had this experience with the Pentagon Papers, and then I went to work at the Catholic Worker. That led me to becoming a Catholic, and that led me to study theology, and that led me to coming to Orbis Books, and that led me to writing books about saints. And you look at it, and it says, oh, it just all, I could go back to when I was, in middle school when I first read the Little Flowers of St. Francis or something. It all seems like a very consistent, path. In the midst of it, you don't really see it, and it's more just kind of swinging from vine to vine, like Tarzan, and just kind of trusting that there's another vine out there. It's only really recently that I've kind of looked and I've said, well, this really, adds up to, a body of work that I've done around saints. That was I can't really wonder or ask myself, well, what am I supposed to do with my life? I have one book kind of added onto another, and it seems to be meaningful to people. Now, I know that writing about saints is not the same thing as being a saint, but I really think that long contemplation and meditation on greatness, moral, spiritual, or beauty in the moral or spiritual realm, does have an effect on our souls. And I like to think that walking in the company of these great souls, rubs off a little bit on me, gives me has kind of shaped my own sort of imagination, and points me in the direction of, certainly, of, I don't know if I'll do another book on saints per se, but walking that kind of path of trying to bear witness. It's like Kierkegaard said, that his job was maybe not to be a saint, but to kind of point in the direction of saintliness, or identify what is false Christianity. That was his kind of vocation. I think that in my work as a publisher and editor, I also am in an opportunity that I have, that I can contribute to things like the struggle against white supremacy, or the struggle against the death penalty, or to protect the earth, or to promote the vision or the mission of Pope Francis. That is the path or the calling that I seem to have found myself on, and I feel very blessed to have found it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robert. It's inspiring to talk to you. Almost as inspiring as reading your books, but pretty close. I feel that spending time in your company gives me the hope that you talked about, maybe a little more courage to carry on with what we're doing. It's not quite on the scale that you're doing it, but to continue to tell the stories and share them, and encourage people to think about how it applies to themselves. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I've enjoyed this very much.